Muslims, they need to understand that we are on a battlefield. And the battlefield, the weapons are not swords and guns, but they are ideas and values. They're bored, alone, the wolf is there, and you're the sheep. And the shaitan will get you.
Now they're looking at treatment that's the same as the treatment for hard drugs.
Even if you fall into it, Islam is like, it's not the end of the world. You can come back straight away. The door is wide open for tawbah, for repentance. I even have a specific number. So I say it needs to be a 7 or 7.5 out of 10.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. And this is another episode of Firmly Rooted. As you can see, we are in a very different setting. We've got this nice table. And the reason for that is we're in London due to our guest who is from London, Ustadh Asim Khan. Ustadh Asim Khan is a pharmacist by trade, a student of Deen. He is an Imam local to London and also author of a few books, including Simple Seerah. Today, we'll be talking about quite a serious topic. So if you're watching this on TV with your kids, then probably best to reconsider, but definitely an episode to watch, inshallah. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum assalam.
How are you, Ustad?
I'm very well, alhamdulillah. Thank you for asking. Yeah. How about yourself?
Good, alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
This is a very new setting for us. I like the table. Usually we're on like chairs kind of in our Manchester studio. So
Right, okay.
people are used to a different studio. This is the London studio because obviously you're from London, so we had to come down, alhamdulillah. How are you?
I'm very well, akhi. I'm excited about today. This particular topic on porn addiction is one that, as an Imam for a number of years, I think I'm hard pressed to think of another topic that has done more damage across the spectrum of communities that the Muslims belong to than this particular one. And what makes it worse is that there's very few discussions about it. Like, how many khutbahs have you been to where the Imam is talking about porn addiction? One brother once said to me that it's like we've made talking about porn more haram than porn itself. It's crazy to think that, it's such a big evil in our society in general, especially in the Muslim community, and yet it doesn't get that attention. Yeah. So
it's a taboo. It's a
big taboo, and the thing is, I mean, we live in such a hyper-sexualized society that you'd think it'd be more okay to talk about these things, more openness towards it. Yeah. But it seems as though there's a bit of stubbornness there, which is kind of hurting us as well.
Yes. Question. Considering that, in my head before this episode, I was thinking, should I have a disclaimer for this episode? If you're watching it on TV with your family, make sure you're not doing that and watching it on your own. Would you recommend that, or do you think keep it closed, watch this episode on your own, or actually, this needs to be talked about?
You shouldn't be watching with your children.
Yeah,
sure.
of course.
But I think that it could be watched like with an audience, like brother and sister, like brothers were watching it as friends, sisters as friends, watching it together. I don't think, the interesting thing about Islam is that we don't shy away from matters that relate to explicit things. Yeah. Except that when we discuss it, we try to discuss it in the most appropriate way, using the best language. And the Prophet ﷺ, whenever he would talk about matters to do with sex, he wasn't vulgar in his language, and we have to tackle these things, and we will choose, inshallah, the best language. Inshallah. But let's not shy away from the topic.
And the general audience at Roots is university students.
Yes.
Those that, live on campus, live at home maybe, but, that kind of 18 to 25-year-old audience.
Yes.
So would you say this topic is especially relevant for that audience?
Big time, yeah.
Big time.
Because I think that these addictions, they start, the entry into, these things usually as adolescent years. Yeah. And then it's really make or break whether you pursue a life free of this or you succumb to it when you get to this particular age group, university. And for that reason, it's so critical to have clarity on this matter and to have it within you to know how to deal with it.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, you're an imam, and you mentioned before this podcast that anecdotally you've dealt with a lot of Muslims with this exact problem. And for that reason, you think that actually it's a very, very common problem. Let's look at the stats of kind of how common this is, and tell me if it surprises you. I purposefully didn't tell you the stats so that you can kind of react.
Okay, sure.
So Muslim Census, which is the leading source of research and insight of Muslims in the UK, they surveyed 542 British Muslims, and their results showed that 83% of Muslims have consumed pornography in their lives, with younger Muslims, especially in the 19 to 24-year-old range, reporting the highest amount of consumption. And the survey displayed that Muslim men consumed considerably more than female counterparts, 4 times as likely. That's kind of like a basic kind of frequency of how common it is.
And which year was this?
2022.
2022, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's shocking. You know what's really shocking though is what's like the basis of, you know, the pandemic nature of this sin. You know, what is the fundamental shift? Because it wasn't like this. You know, when I was in secondary school, it wasn't something that I doubt many people knew about, let alone were indulging in. And now, you know, if we go forward in time, 10 years, 20 years, you find that it's being consumed by children as young as 8, 9, 10. Their sexual encounters are like in their early teens.
Yeah.
So there's like a huge explosion of, you know, these kind of sexual ills and problems in recent times, more so than before. And, you know, if you go back another generation to our parents, you know, you ask them about these kind of things and the explicit nature of society, they were like, it wasn't like that in our times. It was completely different. So you wind back the time and it's like there was even less, you know, explicitness, indecency during their times. So one of the things I was thinking about when talking about porn addiction is looking at it from an ideological lens first.
Okay.
So the way I see it is that Muslims, they need to understand that we are on a battlefield. And the battlefield, the weapons are not swords and guns, but they are ideas and values. And the prevailing ideology of today is liberalism, the idea of being a free human being, doing whatever you want, so long as you're not harming anybody else. And when it comes to matters to do with sex and relationships outside of marriage, you know, it's just about freedom. It's do what makes you feel good. Do whatever it is that brings you happiness or fulfillment in your life. And, you know, if you think about that, that's actually a very destructive type of ideology when it comes down to the implementation. Freedom is something that everyone would be like, yeah, I'm behind that. I support that idea. But they don't actually live their life like that. Example, when it comes to food, yes, if somebody were to say, you know, I subscribe to like a liberal value when it comes to food, and you're like, okay, what does that mean? Oh, you can eat whatever you want, whenever you want, so long as you're not harming anybody else. Is that really the way people eat and, you know, they consume food? No, they know that they need boundaries, they need guidelines, they need limits.
Yeah.
Because without them, it could lead to very unhealthy outcomes. It could actually lead to them harming themselves or killing themselves, right? Why then does that change when it comes to matters to do with sex, to do with sexual gratification? Why do we think that, no, over there, you can do actually whatever you want and it's going to be good for you? That's not what's good for you. In fact, without the limits, without the guidance, without boundaries, we find that there are many ills that come, you know, through indulging in one's sexual appetite that lead to problems to do with your physiology, your mental well-being, and also your spiritual well-being as well. A person's relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how that becomes impacted. And I think people need to understand that, we live in a time where right is labeled as wrong and wrong is labeled as right. I was listening to a BBC4 radio debate, and the topic of the debate was, does pornography objectify women? And I heard that and I thought to myself, is that really up for debate?
How's that a question?
How is that up for debate, right? So it's very interesting that it started off asking the audience who is, who supports the idea that objectifies women. So they did a look at the survey, and basically, I think it was like 85% audience like, yeah, we think that it does objectify women. So then they had a speaker on, right? And this lady, she was the founder of a I don't know what the term is, but like they're creating pornography basically, right? So they're a production team creating pornography, but it's run by women.
Okay.
Right. So she spent the next 7 minutes justifying how her version of creating pornography is actually empowering women.
Right.
Right. And it's something good. Now, the most amazing thing was that after she spoke and concluded her points, they then went back to the audience and said, now, how many people think that pornography objectifies women? And the number went down to 39%. That is how fickle the human mind can be.
Yeah.
That when society says it's like this, you'd be like, oh yeah, it's like that. When society says, no, it's actually a bit like this, people en masse can shift their thinking.
Yeah.
And that's why, subhanAllah, as Muslims, you have to be so aware that we are really in a battlefield. And the worst thing is when you do something haram and you're inside saying, actually, it's not really that bad. Everyone does it. What's the big deal? You're succumbing to this prevailing ideology of liberalism.
Yeah.
And as a Muslim, you have to be very aware of that. Before you can get into the whole, what is my problem? Am I in denial? How do I deal with this? Just know that this is a battle on ideological level as well. And this is just one of those manifestations, the addiction to pornography.
Yeah, definitely. And is that something that we need to convince Muslims first?
They need to be aware of it.
That this is a problem.
They're not really aware that how things are always shifting in society. And, we are a product of our culture, and we are susceptible to those messaging, and the ideology is everywhere. Like, when you watch a sitcom or you watch a drama and you hear people mention pornography, in what context is it often mentioned? Is it mentioned in like, what's the big deal type of thing?
Yes.
Or is it mentioned in, oh my God, that's a terrible thing. Why does he do that?
That is so interesting, because when we were researching for this topic, pornography addiction isn't used all that well unless it's like a Muslim sort of resource that's using it.
Right.
When we were looking at the clinical data, as a medical student, I naturally go to that aspect of it, especially with things like addiction. In the clinical data, in studies, they will not use the word addiction because clinically it's not seen as an addiction by psychologists, by psychiatrists. Whenever we did see papers, it always used problematic pornography use, PPU. And the reason they quoted why they use that term is because they believe that pornography use intrinsically isn't a bad thing, but for some people they may overdo it. And that's what we need to treat, not the use of pornography in the first place. So it kind of, like, it's a battlefield. Everyone's trying to convince you it's not that bad. And if you lose that first battle, then...
It's true. And even maybe we are unintentionally adding to this problem by focusing on the idea of pornography addiction. In Islam, the problem isn't when you're addicted to it. The problem is when you're indulging in it. Exactly. On the first step.
Yeah.
The Prophet ﷺ, he told us that the two eyes, they commit zina, and their portion of zina is to another, watching, gazing, and then the ears, they have their share of zina, which is listening, and then the final thing is the act itself.
Yeah.
So just all these steps, they're all problematic to us.
Yeah.
Whether a person is overindulging in that's almost a secondary matter.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is that the shaitan leads us down a dark path.
Yeah.
And all the steps we need to be aware of it, and need to feel a sense of inhibition towards those things. And if you don't, then you will end up at this really, really dark place, and you're thinking, actually, oh, how did I get here? How did it become like this, where every human being I look at, I objectify them, and in my mind I'm always thinking about the next time I'm going to watch this thing, and it's spoiling me inward, outwardly, etc., etc.
Yeah, and drinking one drop of alcohol is as haram as drinking a bottle of alcohol, and drinking one drop can lead to becoming an alcoholic.
Yeah,
but the problem
it's all haram, but
it's haram.
It's haram from the get-go.
Yeah.
But obviously, being addicted to that is far worse,
Of course.
right? It's far worse in terms of sin. It's far worse in terms of impact.
Yeah.
But my point was just focusing on the idea of addiction may unintentionally make the viewer think, oh, that is the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, like music, for example, being addicted to music. Yeah, it's far worse than listening to music here and now, but doesn't mean that this one is not haram.
Yeah.
And that one's haram one. No, they're both haram, but one is worse than the other.
Yeah, definitely. And just to convince the few people watching that still might think that it might not be as big of a problem, let's detrivialize the problem even more. And I want to see again if what I'm about to say is surprising. So I was looking at the clinical studies on pornography addiction and possible treatments for pornography addiction. And you're a pharmacist. I'm a medical student, so this is going to be, I think, quite interesting.
Sure.
Which is that one of the treatments used for pornography addiction is a medication called naltrexone. And you might have heard of that medication. It's quite a common medication used for stopping smoking.
Yeah.
But it's also a medication that's used for people that are addicted to opioids, like heroin. That medication is used. And it's being trialed in patients who are addicted to pornography.
Yeah.
And there was studies that I was seeing looking at the effectiveness of using this medication. So not to say take this medication if you watch pornography, but the idea is that even now doctors and psychiatrists are seeing this problem with as much seriousness as actual hard drug addictions.
Yeah.
And the neurochemistry is very similar to hard drug addictions. It's often said that, people do say, okay, watching pornography activates the same areas of your brain as like cocaine or heroin, and it can be easy to trivialize that as just some fact that probably has been exaggerated, but that is the reality, that it releases dopamine, it causes the same effect as hard drugs, and now they're looking at treatment that's the same as the treatment for hard drugs.
I mean, the thing is that indicates how unnatural this habit is. I think that's what we need to recognize, that this is unnatural, and it's actually very foreign to the human experience. Because if you go back even like imagine like 3 generations ago, your ancestors living like in a village, for example. You're from Pakistan?
Yes.
Yeah, from Pakistan.
Yourself?
Yeah, Pakistan as well. Yeah, so living in a village somewhere back home, their whole life would result in them interacting with, let's say, between 1,000 and 10,000 people. And their sexual encounters most probably would be with just one person. Yes. If they were promiscuous, then a few people, right? But that would happen over the span of many years. Okay. Now, transport yourself in today's time, where a person can, at least in their mind's eye, a'udhu billah min dhalik, have sexual encounters with multiple women within 1 hour. This is unnatural. A human being is not supposed to subject themselves to that much sexual gratification in such a short amount of time. And that is why they have to resort to medicating us to, bring us back into that kind of normal level of enjoyment, satisfaction, gratification. Once a long time ago, I heard a sheikh, he was talking about, not pornography, but he was talking about, actually he was talking about pornography. And he mentioned a verse of the Quran, wallahi, that really hit me. He said, Allah the Almighty says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, that we honored the children of Adam. To think of yourself as someone Allah has honored, given honor, dignity, nobility, respect. And then he said, am I going to degrade myself by pleasuring myself to images on a screen? It doesn't seem befitting for me as a human being to do that. And then he said, Allah the Almighty spoke about people of misguidance and said, "Inhum kal an'ami bal hum adal." They are like cattle, in fact, even worse than that. And to think that, what makes animals is that they don't have those sensitivities, they don't have those inhibitions, they don't have that kind of sense of decency and shame, which is what makes a human being into a human being. So sometimes when we do these things, and everyone can fall into it, they have to remind themselves who they are.
Yeah.
They are not worthless people. They are not people that are here to satisfy their own desires in any way they wish. Allah has made us honorable, gave us a dignity, and we should not, humiliate ourselves, by subjecting ourselves to the things that unfortunately many people do. And I think that's part of the problem, is that people, they become desensitized to these things because everybody else is doing it. It's not a big deal. Like, no one would bat an eyelid if they found out that I did these things. And that's just the trend of today. It doesn't make a difference on the Day of Judgment if everyone is doing it and then you did it, or if no one did it and then you did it.
Yeah. I think it's so hard to get that point to stick when it is so normalized, and all the media around us makes it seem like it's a normal thing. So it's hard to detrivialize it when everything around you is trying to trivialize it.
Yeah. But it's not a small thing though. It's somebody who is addicted to it. They will tell you how it affects their life in so many damaging ways. Like, they talk about relationships. There was a survey done by, I forgot exactly the name of the organization, but it was an association of lawyers in America. They did a survey, and they said that 65% of marriages end in divorce because one of the partners is overusing, I think there was a word to use, overusing pornography, overusing pornography, or something to do with that basically. But they said 65% of marriages ending because of essentially one person being, addicted to these kind of. So thinking about how damaging this could be to your relationship, to your marriage, to your sense of dignity, honor in the eyes of other people, and then obviously the spiritual side, the fact that these eyes are a blessing that Allah has given us. Recently, somebody made this really good, did this thought experiment. So I'll do it on you. Yeah.
Okay.
So let's say that somebody right now offered you £1 million on the condition that you lose all your teeth and you cannot replace them with dentures or implants the rest of your life, no teeth. Would you accept £1 million?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No.
What about 3 million?
No, I wouldn't do it.
What about £1 billion? For real?
And you couldn't get dentures.
You can never have a replacement. You will lose every single tooth for £1 billion.
That's more likely.
That's
more likely.
Okay, that's good. That's good. You need to be honest with yourself. Yeah. And I was there with you as well.
I would do $1 billion.
Because I was thinking, how much could I help people with the $1 billion?
Exactly.
That's the idea. Yeah. What could I do for the Muslim,
exactly.
for the Muslim community with $1 billion? So, but the point isn't about you. The point is actually about how much you value this blessing. How much do we value our teeth? Before that, you probably never would have thought, I value them to the tune of £1 billion. And on top of that, how much shukr then do we do for these blessings that we only just realize how much we value them? Like, maybe someone has never thanked Allah for their teeth, and yet they value them at £1 billion. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
How much more does that apply to the eyes? For £1 billion, would you lose your eyes?
Or your brain.
Huh? Yeah, or your mind.
Or like you being a functional human being that has normal desires. And
so these eyes, subhanAllah, the value that we afford them, we haven't even calculated that. But then to know that it's way more than our teeth, right? Yeah, way more than our teeth.
Definitely.
So now we've got to find a figure, 10 billion, and you're thinking, you really have to think hard. And the point isn't what the figure is. The point is, what are we using this blessing for? If we're using it for things that displease the one who gave it to us, and the one who will become angry with us using it in that way, what does that say about the lack of respect we have for these blessings? I think that is something that we have to bring into the fore of our mind when the shaitan comes to us and tries to provoke us to use them to do these haram things. Because, bro, everyone has these desires, and the access to them has increased and made it so easy. We have to really, like I said, the battlefield mentality, equip ourselves with the weapons needed to defend ourselves. And the weapons really are these positive thoughts that when the shaitan comes and says, why don't you just, and you're like, no, but these are the eyes Allah gave me. How can I use them for this? And then have to answer to Allah on that Day of Judgment. We have to really think and have an arsenal of weapons that we can use in those weak moments. And even if, subhanAllah, this is the amazing thing about Islam, even if you succumb to it, because even in the hadith I mentioned that the Prophet said that, you know, the eyes, they have a portion of zina, and that is through gazing. He began that hadith by saying that every son of Adam will have their portion of zina, meaning that everyone will fall into this problem. But the main difference is when you fall into it, number one, you recognize that it is something wrong, the whole liberalism thing that we spoke about.
Yeah.
And number two, what do you do in that scenario? Allah the Almighty, He's waiting for us to turn back to Him in repentance.
Yeah.
Just to say astaghfirullah, just to say astaghfirullah could be enough for that sin to be removed and a sense of inhibition built into your mind and your heart for the next time. As soon as you say, what's the point saying astaghfirullah, the next time becomes so much easier,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
So there's, even if you fall into it, Islam is like, it's not the end of the world. You can come back straight away. The door is wide open for tawbah, for repentance. So I think, you know, this is all part of a person empowering themselves spiritually to overcome these desires.
Definitely. And it sort of connects to a question that I was going to ask as well, which is going back to addiction and being addicted. We kind of explained why watching pornography, even in a small amount, is haram, and not just haram, but the reasons, the rational reasons why it's so bad for you.
Yeah.
And I think most Muslims, most people know that it's bad for you. And that same study that I talked about, 65% of the Muslims said that they believe that there's physical and mental health detriments to themselves. And then 33% said that they have had work and education detriments. This is self-perceived, which means they know that it's bad.
Yeah.
Yet they still will go back to it. Why is that happening from a kind of more basic level?
I think on a practical level, a person living in a hyper-sexualized society needs to have that halal outlet to satisfy themselves. And the only one halal outlet is through marriage. And that is why I tell my younger brothers and sisters that when you want to get married, make sure you get married to someone you are attracted to. And they say, oh, what about deen? I say, yeah, deen is more important. But if you marry someone who is religious, but you're not attracted to them, you're subjecting yourself to all those temptations that you're supposed to be marginalizing through marriage. Yeah. So as Muslims, we need to recognize that, you know what, very sexualized society, wherever I look, wherever I see the billboards on the streets, on the trains, everywhere, there's so much temptation. I need to have the outlet that I can go home, I have a spouse that I find attractive, and the other spouse recognizes the need to make sure that the other person is always sexually gratified. Yeah, and I think that's the second part of the problem, which is, as a married couple, are you actually invested in making sure that the other person is sexually gratified? And I think that's maybe a topic for another podcast.
We've had a couple of marriage podcasts.
You have, okay,
and we've had marriage podcast part 1 and part 2, and I was on a roots retreat, and I was asking students what episodes they'd like next, and you know what the most common answer was? Marriage part 3.
Marriage part 3? No way, subhanAllah.
So I think for those people, they'll be happy we had that small segue. But
no, this is definitely very important, that a person needs to have that outlet that they can, you know, satisfy.
And actually, just to entertain this segue just for a bit, you mentioned that those are two very important things. The first one being attractive to your spouse. That's quite simple. You will know that, or you won't know that.
Not really. I actually I even have a specific number. So I say it needs to be a 7 or 7.5 out of 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see.
The reason I say 7 or 7.5 out of 10 is because there's a common thing that I've come across, which is people get married. They say they're attracted to the other person, but then they fall out of attraction. Right, so obviously as you get a little bit older, or your wife has a child, then they say, Sheikh, I'm not attracted to my wife anymore, I want to get married again. Or worse than that, a'udhu billah, they're indulging in things outside of the marriage, right? So because that has become such a common problem that I personally have been approached with, I realized that not only must the person be attractive to you, but of a certain level.
Okay.
Yes. So we're not going for 10s because that would be becoming too fussy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But we're not going for anything like a 5 because in your mind, yeah, it was passable. Yeah, but that's now. What about in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? So I would say a 7 or a 7.5 out of 10 should be the gold standard that you go
Okay.
for.
Very, very, very.
I hope I'm not being misunderstood.
No,
but
no, no.
You know where I'm coming from.
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
Definitely.
I'm not-
And the
yeah.
other way around as well.
I didn't say which way around.
Okay.
I just said
Yes.
7 out of 10.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whatever way you were talking about, that other way around as well.
Yeah,
Because
both.
we actually
both,
aren't.
no, both.
Well, when we haven't actually mentioned any genders here.
No, no.
Throughout this podcast, I mentioned that men, due to the study,
Yeah.
are 4 times more likely to be addicted or watch porn. But apart from that, we actually haven't
It's true.
mentioned genders. And
Yeah.
is that is there a distinction to be made?
I don't think there's a need to make a distinction. Reason being is because women are indulging in this sin, just like men are. The amount of men versus women is a secondary matter because as a Muslim we said once is a haram, just like 10 times is a haram, just like addiction is a haram. There's obviously a spectrum, but let's not just identify, oh, if you're doing it this much, no, now it's a problem. Yeah.
And one Muslim with that problem is as bad as another Muslim having.
Yeah. In fact, when people talk about, and this is the other thing, when you talk about openly, oh, I am addicted to this thing, or I do indulge in this thing, it diminishes the sensitivity towards that sin in other people's minds, i.e. it kind of normalizes it a little bit as well.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful when you talk about these things. We don't want to, through statistics, make it sound like so everyone's unfortunately doing this thing, and then your mind, shaitan, is like, yeah, see, you do it as well. They're doing it over there as well. It's like, so you can go 2 ways.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to manage the conversation about these things in a way that doesn't normalize in the minds of people that this is happening on such a rampant level. But at the same time, you need to bring it to their attention that this is a really pressing matter that you need to be very cautious about.
Definitely. So that first point isn't as straightforward as I imagined. And then the second point does seem to be a bit more nuanced, complex. So how do you approach that conversation?
Which one, about deen?
So there was the being attractive to your wife and also having that understanding of intimacy. How do you know that?
So this well, I mean, if you're not being sexually satisfied, right? So the problem isn't that. The problem is, how do you broach that conversation? Yeah,
exactly.
It's a difficult conversation, but I'm pretty sure by the end of it, the other person will be pleased that you mentioned those things, as long as you do it in a sensitive manner. But you need to be open and upfront. You can say, look, I'm not happy with the way things are in the bedroom. Can we not try this? Can we not try this? I would prefer it, if you would dress like this, or if you would if you come to bed at this time, for example. Just being as open and honest as possible is way better than just hoping the other person would change, or trying to be indirect, or brushing it under the carpet, which is the worst thing. Because what is at stake? What is at stake? Yusuf alayhi salam, he had a choice between being coerced into a sexual act or going to prison. And he said, as-sijnu ahabbu ilay. He said, prison is preferable to me. Think about that. He's saying that in the grand scheme of things, being coerced into a haram sexual act is worse than going to prison for an unjust matter. Yeah. So when we're talking about our wives, we're talking about our relationships as married couples, if we don't sexually gratify each other, then we are creating another situation, which is the possibility of haram. And we just said how bad that is. Yeah. So need to be open and need to be transparent, and you need to explore as many halal ways as possible to make sure that one another are being sexually gratified.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you.
How did this become about marriage?
Always does. Always does.
All paths lead to marriage. Yeah.
But let's track back slightly and discuss a possible other reason why Muslims, just anyone really, might fall into watching
Yep.
pornography, even if they know that it's wrong and they don't want to do it,
Yep.
but yet they still do it. And going back to some clinical data, there was a group of psychologists who published a peer-reviewed study in PubMed from the University of Exeter and Limerick in 2022. And what they did was they got a group of people, this was in 3 digits, hundreds of people, and they asked them a number of different questions relating to different topics.
Okay.
The number one question was, how frequently do you use pornography? And to be in this study, all of them watched pornography to some amount. And then they asked they gave them a number of questionnaires that were based around how meaningful their life was, how much emotional avoidance they exercise in their life, and the amount of boredom they have in their life, alongside how much sexual desire they think they require in their life. So 4 different aspects. And of course, there was a significant correlation between their sexual desire and pornography use when they're using it. But really interestingly, there was a statistically significant relationship between, number one, emotional avoidance in their life and the frequency of pornography use.
Okay.
And there was, again, another statistically significant relationship between the amount of boredom they experience in their life and frequency of pornography use, and an indirect link between how meaningless their life is
Yeah.
and the frequency of pornography use. I just found that so interesting.
Yes.
Because I think you jump straight to thinking the reason that someone's going towards this sin is because they have this almost kind of evolutionary animalistic desire.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas this study is proposing something different. And in their conclusion, these psychologists mentioned that our study incorporates pornography consumption as a means of existential escape.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah,
difficult word.
Yeah.
I found that so interesting. And even though this was a completely secular study, non-Muslims doing this study, or well, I assume, it kind of had the layers of spirituality and Islam and the lack of spirituality kind of embedded within their conclusions and their data. And I just wanted to ask you what you think of that study.
Yeah, it's fascinating. On the topic of meaning, Allah the Almighty says, "Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat lin-nas." You are the best community taken for humanity. Muslims are supposed to be like the elite community when it comes to all other communities. But what makes them elite? Allah then says, "Ta'muruna bil ma'rufi wa tanhana 'anil munkar wa tu'minuna billah." That you uphold the good and you denounce the evil and you believe in Allah. What's fascinating about that is what defines us as the best is the meaning that we hold in our life. That we are supposed to be activists on the front foot, there to create change. And what that does is it puts you on a path in life, a trajectory, which is one of creating change, being an inspiration to other people, and working towards a higher objective. Now, if you have 2 people, one, his mind is always on how am I going to achieve this vision in my life. Another person who's super talented, got lots of resources, but they have no vision, no objective, no goal in their life. You'll find that there's a huge difference between their lifestyles. And one of the things that relates to what we're talking about is what that person does in their free time. Yes. If you have no vision, no objective in your life, then every moment of free time you have could be used for anything, good or bad. Yeah. And as a Muslim, we have to understand that what makes us true believers of Allah is our vision towards that hereafter and wanting to take advantage of our life and opportunities to do something good, and always trying to think about how my next thing in life can be the thing that builds my house in paradise more, can bring me close to Allah, can help me be an inspiration to other people, etc., etc. And that ties in with boredom. Why are you bored? You're bored because you don't know what you should be doing, and there's nothing to fill that void in your life. And that goes back to meaning as well. And the Prophet, he told us that shaitan, he goes for the lone sheep. just like the wolf goes for the lone sheep. And a lot of these problems to do with addiction is because the person is spending too much time alone. They're bored, alone, the wolf is there, and you're the sheep, and the shaitan will get you. And, my mom used to say, back in the day, the worst place our children could be was on the streets. Now the worst place they can be is in their room. And that is so true, because who's in the room with them? The entire universe on their device. Everything is there, accessible. And then you have those rabbit holes that lead you down dark paths and everything, and there's no restriction. So a person needs to recognize that, what, if I am struggling with this, maybe a root cause of that is too much time by myself. So trying to become more sociable person. People talk about, I'm socially awkward, I've had social anxiety. Maybe that is because you're spending too much time alone. Yes. And being with the brothers, being with the sisters, especially good company, will fill your time, firstly. And number two, you might be positively influenced by those people in your life as well. Socializing more, just being more active in terms of sports and hobbies, trying to fill your time. Recently I took up a new sport, paddle. I don't know if you play paddle or not.
Paddle?
You never heard of paddle?
No.
It's like a hybrid between squash and tennis.
Pickleball.
That's the American version.
Oh, is that the American version?
Yeah, we look down on those. No, joking. It's a different sport. So, taking up a new sport, is good for in terms of your body, but also in terms of your mental well-being. Spiritually as well, subhanAllah, can be good for you, because at the very least, it's taking you away from time you might have used to do something haram.
Yeah.
Right? Especially if you're young, filling your time with activities, socializing within a halal environment, and just being in good company sometimes is enough just to break that pattern of those bad habits that you've kind of created based on being alone too much.
Yeah, definitely. And I hate to put the neurochemistry back into the topic, but when you exercise, when you're releasing that energy in a positive way, you're still actually releasing dopamine. Just like when you watch pornography, you're releasing dopamine.
Yes, yeah.
So you still feel good after exercise, mentally and physically, but you've worked for that dopamine release.
Yeah.
And that's the right, natural way to do it.
And it's halal, and it's wholesome, and it's at the right level as well, because you spoke about the unnatural, this unnatural way of stimulating the mind. It's something very foreign to the human experience, and it's something that obviously is degrading to the human being as well. So all of these things, they can help a person. I think the main thing is also always is being mindful of the triggers. Allah the Almighty says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la tattabi'u khutuwati shaitan. Believers, don't follow the footsteps of the shaitan. And I always reflect over the idea of footsteps, because if you're have a helicopter view of a trail, if you zoom in, you don't know where the footsteps are leading to.
Yeah.
And also, each footstep is so close to the next one, it's almost negligible. But on the grand scheme of things, the first and the last could be very far away. In the same way, the shaitan, he will delude you, take advantage of you slowly, lure you to places that you don't want to go. And so what you need to do is think of the triggers. Like, is it the case that when you look at your social media feed, there's a few glances that then evoke those sexual thoughts, which then lead to you maybe being alone, which then lead to you watching these haram things, and the cycle goes down like that. If that is the case, then when it comes to that trigger, just remove it or do something to change it so that it doesn't, unfollow those pages, for example. Or say to yourself, if I am on the phone, it's going to be in the presence of other people, like, just in the front room where other people are there. Just knowing what your personal triggers are can help to just to, disrupt that kind of cycle that you've fallen into.
Yeah, definitely. And even, it's just like the billboard. It might be intentional, it might not be intentional, but if you're always on social media, you're going to be exposed to explicit images, and that's a gateway. And not just those instances where you're exposed, linking back to loneliness, linking back to anxiety. I've got some statistics for social media as well.
Bismillah.
And this was again from the Muslim census. This was a study in 2022, a separate study. It surveyed 300 British Muslims, primarily between the ages of 19 and 30 years old, and they found that this is self-perceived from the survey, that 79% of Muslims in the survey believed social media to be harmful.
How many?
79%.
79%, okay.
55% of Muslims report low self-esteem due to social media. 45% report anxiety due to social media. 39% report loneliness due to social media. And even 10% have said that social media has caused suicidal ideation in the past. So very serious stuff.
Yeah.
But it connects back to the themes you're talking about with loneliness, a lack of meaning, anxiety, staying in your room all day.
Yeah, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he has this amazing saying that the Sharia only came to bring benefit to humanity and to save them from harm. And what's fascinating is that if you ask someone, oh, what are the do's and don'ts of Islam, they'll be like, oh, you can't drink alcohol, can't deal with interest, you can't do this, you can't eat pork, for example. But what's actually happening is that the Sharia, Islam, came to prohibit the things that are harmful and to oblige you to do things that are beneficial. Yeah. Beneficial means what? They're beneficial for you as a human being, spiritually, physiologically, mentally, all ways that it could be positive. And now through experimentation, they're like, okay, yeah, alcohol, there's no safe consumption of alcohol. Oh yeah, when it comes to like pornography, yeah, it can get to a stage where it's actually quite harmful for you.
They're not at that point yet.
Yeah.
Inshallah, in a few years, they'll.
All these things you'll find that eventually they'll find out actually what Islam prohibited actually should be prohibited.
Yeah.
Because it cannot be managed properly by a human being, or it could be taken to an extreme, or in terms of the probabilities of it, it will lead to more harm than good. All of these things. But as a Muslim, it's very important that we understand that when you do something haram, there is a spectrum of harm that can come from that. And what Allah is telling you to stay away from is for your own good.
Yeah.
It's for your own benefit. It's only going to make you a happier person. It's only going to make you a person who has that peace and tranquility in your life. And these things, they only bring a cloud of shame over you, of a lack of self-worth over you, of humiliation over you. And this is not what Allah created us for. So all these studies, they just prove all these things that, Islam said this is haram, and that means it was bad, and this is how bad it is.
Yeah. It doesn't need proof.
But after the fact that you've totally wrecked society and now you can test them to see how bad it is, why does it have to come to that stage?
That seems to be a common theme in society. Yeah. Okay. So we've talked a lot. We've touched upon social media. We've talked about the problem and how big that problem is, and then also a lot of reasons why that problem occurs, and some ideas as to how we can avoid those triggers and with loneliness, etc. Let's talk about one final thing in the last few minutes that we have, which is seeking help and practically fixing this problem if it is really a problem. You're addicted to pornography. And from that study, I think we've thrown so many studies around, but from that very first study that I mentioned about Muslims and pornography addiction, the final stat that I found not surprising, but it makes sense why pornography is such a big problem, considering this as well, which is only 4% of Muslims seek professional help for whatever reason. Shame, because it's a taboo topic, no one talks about it. They may not perceive it as a problem in the first place, so why would they seek it? But that is the fact. 4% of Muslims seek professional help. And my question to you is, should that number be higher? Would that fix things? And if so, how do we make that number higher? Where should Muslims go for help?
So my mom is actually a counselor. She's been doing counseling, couples counseling.
Your mother?
Yeah, for probably over 30 years now. And I'll be honest, for a long time, I didn't estimate it with a due estimation. And that changed when one of my very close students, he was going through a marriage problem, and he sought help, him and his wife, through my mother, but he didn't tell me. And after 6 months of him receiving help, we were having a dinner together, and he said, after Allah, if it wasn't for the counseling that your mother provided me and my wife, I would not be married today. And I was like, the thing is, he was coming to my house as well, because our mum does it from home sometimes. I had no idea. And in that moment, I think something clicked in my mind that, this professional intervention through counselors and psychotherapists when it comes to these problems is really needed.
Yeah.
and underappreciated. I mean, I was that guy that didn't really appreciate it that much. So I think that Muslims need to be more aware of this. But there's one thing I would add to this, and that is the importance of seeking professional help from a Muslim. Yeah, from a Muslim counselor, Muslim GP, Muslim psychotherapist, whoever. Yeah. And the reason being is because it's an ideological thing. Ultimately, if the person on the other side of the desk doesn't believe that pornography is a big deal, it's not really that, it's not really bad unless you're addicted to it, then that's going to formulate the part of the advice that they give you. And as a Muslim, that's not what you need to hear. You need to hear that which is going to save you from the hellfire.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that you're getting the right help, but from the right person as well.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Shout out to your mum, by the way, for not breaking confidentiality.
Yeah,
True professional.
Yeah. Even when I said to her, "So you in?" and she's like, "Who?"
Very good, alhamdulillah. Okay, so seeking help from a professional, be specifically a Muslim.
Especially if you are, would you say, like addicted?
Yeah, and where do you find these Muslim professionals?
I think there's a few really good Muslim organizations, resources online now that specialize in providing these services. But the thing is, this could go worldwide, inshallah. So I think the main thing is that people seek out the professionals, try and make sure that they're Muslims, and most importantly, don't be in denial, access these services and benefit themselves, inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair. What a interesting episode from
Alhamdulillah.
the clinical aspects, the spiritual aspects. Marriage was always in there.
That's right.
That's nice.
Found its way in there.
Alhamdulillah, ending off with some practical steps to inshallah help those brothers and sisters who maybe or couples who are really struggling. So yeah, jazakallah khair, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My pleasure. Thank you.